the timing. It's really difficult for me to work a full time and then finish 3 classes and then add an extra like 4 credit class to it. So I'm just gonna take it in the fall and take the rest of the summer. Yeah. It was good. It honestly wasn't even that busy. It was just, like because it was raining, like it was kind of slow and people just came in, but it was a lot of easy stuff. So lately it's been like flying by, and then it's great having that in there. Of course it is. Like I sit in the hallway and like, and then everybody's freaking out because like we're just like being disciplined, and so and so yeah, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good. Is that true? What? Normal failure. I don't know what I thought I said. I don't know. I don't know what I thought I said. Yes. I was like, what? Just what? About having yeah, that's fine. Well, don't forget. Oh, that's fine. You excited for it?
Hello, everybody. All right, hello, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Wonderful. Welcome to our monthly mental health ministry conversation. Want to thank everybody that's watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Ask that you go ahead and share the post, and I would be extremely appreciative. Again, those that are watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, do me a favor, go ahead and share the post, and I will be extremely appreciative. We're going to place our conversation in the hands of one of our co-coordinators, soon to be Dr. John Parker. All right, John.
All right. How's everybody doing?
Right.
All right. Okay. So today, in the past couple months, we kind of talked about a lot of things related to emotional intelligence and kind of knowing more about how to recognize certain feelings and how to kind of manage those things. So today I wanted to talk about something that we call the cycle of emotion. And Pastor Rawls, is it possible to have that small PNG that I sent you in the background? It doesn't have to be there now, but whenever you get a chance.
Okay.
It just.
All right. I'll locate it and get it up for you.
Okay. And it's no pressure. Whenever you get a chance to get it.
Okay.
And so the basic idea of what we call the cycle of emotion is basically whenever we're presented with a trigger or stressor, as we call them, there's a cycle that happens with us as humans and how we kind of deal with this thing that happens. And so for the sake of our conversation, well, I guess I should ask, has anybody heard of the cycle of emotions? Does that ring a bell for anyone? Is that something anybody's ever heard of?
Not necessarily particularly that wording, but I know when we were dealing with the emotional intelligence and all the different emotions that we go through, I think we kind of touched on some of that stuff.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure if that's in the same area or not.
Okay, it's kind of like a broader way in which that an event happens and we deal with that event when it happens. And so it's really just about how we manage an event, how we manage ourselves, how we manage our feelings and all that type of stuff. Got it back up. Daddy. Okay, so basically, and also give you a full warning, I'm on super daddy duty today. We had to split the kids up, and so I got stuck with the baby. So if she pops up every now and again, she just be saying hi, and we'll just proceed as it's going. All right. So at the top of the cycle of emotions, and if you need me to send it to you again, Pastor, I can send it to you.
No, I got it. I'm about to find it.
Okay. There's an event that happens, right? So we'll give you a scenario. Something that has been a trigger for me, has been a stressor for me, just because of how I grew up and where I grew up, is being at a red light and then someone honking. And so depending on where you're from and depending on how you're raised, it can mean different things. Anybody in general, if you're at a red light, what are the things that come to your mind when you hear somebody honk?
They are trying to get my attention. I don't know what the intentions are, but they're trying to get my attention.
Okay, I like that. I wish I had that same positivity. I'm working on it. The Lord ain't finished with me yet. But so for me, and that's very good. I'm gonna try to remember that someone is trying to get my attention. That's all. Just leave it at that. And so this is exactly what we're talking about. If I'm at a red light and somebody honks at me, based on where I'm from and kind of how I grew up, it's a sign of aggression, as opposed to it being a way in which somebody's just trying to get my attention, right? It becomes a thing where it's like, oh, okay, I'm at this light. You feeling some kind of way. Maybe I didn't go fast enough. Maybe the light just turned green and within a millisecond, you rushing me, trying to get me out the door, or trying to get me to go forward. And so when that happens, there's a cycle that happens to me that I have to be intentional about breaking the cycle, because as we see on number 5, there's an action and there's an after effect. So this is the cycle of emotion that we have in the background. So there's a prompting event, me being at the red light, somebody honking. There's a way that I interpret that honking. There's a physical response. There's an urge to act. There's an action, and there's an after effect. So we're just kind of going to go through this with a couple different examples and kind of see how this kind of plays out in our real lives. And so we could just go with the red light situation. So I get honked at, somebody honks. I wish I viewed it as somebody trying to get my attention, but for me, I interpret that as a act of aggression, right? And so if I was in my right space, I would interpret it as someone trying to get my attention. And so what happens in this interpretation phase, depending on the person, the next we have a physical response to that event. And so physical response can come in different forms, and it's usually physiological. So physiological is like something that happens to you, like you have a panic attack, you get sweaty palms, you get butterflies in your stomach. There's something that happens along those lines when that event happens to you. So I'm at the light, somebody honks, I interpret it as aggression. What happens with me is usually I get tense. If my hands on the steering wheel, I grab the steering wheel and I immediately go into this look back, who was that honking at me and why are you honking at me? So not only do I have a physical response of me grabbing the wheel, sometimes my stomach will drop because, you know, where I'm from, when it's time for action, your stomach's like, whoop, and you're like, okay, it's time to go. It's kind of puts you on high alert. It's almost like the fight, flight, or freeze response, if anybody's familiar with that. Fight, flight, or freeze. I can explain that. So basically, when something triggers you, generally people have three responses to, like, say you're scared, say somebody jumps out at you, you freeze because you're like, I don't know what just happened. And it's almost like when have you seen like animals that play dead? They just turn over and they just act like they're dead. So you just freeze. Fight is when you physically, somebody jumps out at you and scares you. You've seen those TV shows or those American Sweaty Home videos where somebody jumps out and then somebody punches them in the face when they try to scare them. That's a fight response to something, an event that happens to you. And then there's the flight. Some people run off when they get scared. They run off. And so those are the type of things, the physical responses and the physiological symptoms that happen when we have this event. And so again, for me, when I'm at the light, I hear the horn. I take that as a sign of aggression. My stomach drops and I immediately start looking around for the source of this aggression that I feel that's coming towards. Any questions so far?
No. Yeah, I understand.
Okay. And so then when we get to number 4, the urge to act, that's kind of like a situation where and I will get into it later, but when we feel as if there's an action that needs to take place outside of just going forward. So if at the green light, somebody honks, I see that the light is green. Oh, let me just go forward. Thank you for getting my attention. I appreciate that. Let me go forward. Instead, in times past, for me, I hear the honk. Interpret it as aggression. I have a physical response. I'm looking around, see where the danger's coming from. My urge to act can either be look at the person and stare at them, and let them know that I feel a certain way about what they've done, or I let them go around me and I follow them to their home, or I feel like I want to follow them to their home, or that there's other things within me that are at war, like, man, I should just really let that go. But in my mind, if I let that go, I'm a punk. But then I realized, man, you're not a punk because you let somebody pass you up when they honked at you. Like, there's all these things that kind of go through your mind that are the probing point, the pushing point for you to act. And then there's the action, and which could be, you know, saying some choice words to the person, following the person home, letting them get in front of you, flashing your lights at them. You purposely waiting at the light with your brake pushed so nobody goes. There's a bunch of different things. And then there's the after effect. And the after effect is really kind of like what we're kind of getting at, because oftentimes the after effect is like the letdown period. Like after you've done something and you've had the time to process it and you really feel bad about what you've done. And sometimes people feel justified. But in terms of what we're talking about, we're trying to break the cycle of negative emotions and negative after effects. So when we go through this wheel a little more in depth, the goal is to make sure that your actions are good and that they're healthy. And then the after effects are also good and healthy things. So again, with this situation with the red light, hey, I just go because I've interpreted it as, hey, somebody's just trying to get my attention. And then afterwards, I can deal with those feelings of like, man, I hate when people honk at me and it makes me feel a certain way. But I can also do some self-talk and say, hey, you did the right thing. Like, there was no harm, no foul. Nobody is going to lose their life. There's no need to get into a physical altercation. You deal with your emotions and you keep going. And that's kind of where we want to get to. And so the whole point of this wheel is that oftentimes we'll have actions and after effects that are negative that we don't want to have happen. But because we're so used to responding to an event in a certain way, we have negative actions and our after effects are not good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I generally do this type of exercise with people, the goal is really to uncover, number two, the interpretation, and really get to a different action. So I'll give you an example. I've worked with clients who are teachers, right? And they're in the classroom. And I've never been a teacher. Well, I was a substitute teacher once and that didn't last very long. I realized that wasn't for me. When you're an adult and you really physically ready to fight teenagers, like in a teaching environment, and then it's time to hang it up. It's like, hey, you know what? This ain't the space for me. But when I'm meeting with teachers and I'm trying to help them understand kind of how they're processing emotions in real time in the classroom, what will happen is here's an event. So you have a student that's talking that you've maybe had a conversation with before, like, hey, please wait your turn. Please don't talk out of turn. Please raise your hand. And so the event is this person is talking again. Give me some ideas on how you, as a teacher, or even if just as you as an individual, how would you interpret that event? Someone you've had a conversation with and you said, hey, over and over again, please don't talk out of turn, raise your hand, keep your voice down, whatever that looks like. How would you personally interpret that event?
Yes, naturally, if you don't take into consideration, reasons why they may be doing it, what may be causing it, you might just assume that they're not listening to you. They're or disregarding what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that works. Some of the things that I've heard from some teachers is that they feel that the student is disrespectful when they're talking out of turn, right? Or they don't care about the class, or they're a bad teacher because if they were a good teacher, the students wouldn't be talking out of turn or talking at all, or they'd be more fully engaged. And so you see how kind of your Pastor Rawls interpretation were a little more positive, but if someone has a negative view of that event, if they interpret that view negative, you're already starting at a point of the rest of this emotion cycle is going to be bad. So if you see the student talking as disrespectful, that's going to lead you to have a certain physical response, urge action, and after effects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think just life experiences will play a major role in how you interpret whatever the actions are. And so if that teacher's been in that class all year long and have seen this teacher has had experiences with this student that me just coming in to observe may not have had. And so our interpretations are going to be different based on our experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think that is a good point because it's sad when you have seasoned teachers again that I've met with that still are having this same interpretation, right? Like you've been in the classroom for a long time. What's going on with your classroom management skills, but then also what's going on with you to where, especially if you're thinking like I'm a bad teacher because they shouldn't be talking or they would be fully engaged if I was a better teacher, there's some internal things that are happening with you that are preventing you from seeing the situation in a way that you could possibly see it as something positive or beneficial, right? And I think sometimes it just comes from, who we are as individuals. If we're not really vigilant, if we're having self-doubt or if we're dealing with other issues, our first point of contact at that interpretation point can always go left, can always go sideways because we're not secure in who we are. We don't have a good understanding of what's really going on in the classroom or what's going on with the particular students. And like you said, if this is happening, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I would say, yeah, like even in relationships, based on past relationships, our interpretation of an act, might be completely different, based on
Yeah.
past relationships. And so someone might interpret getting home late as wonder what's going on, where somebody else might interpret it as, guess something came up, you know.
Yeah.
And so I just
Yep.
think I think just those past experiences play
Mhm.
a major role. And when we acknowledge that those past experiences do play a major role, I think that's when we try to reach out and see, well, how can I view it different? Looking at the fact that I've had some negative experiences with whether it's blowing a horn, even like with me,
Mhm.
I kind of look at how was it blown? Did they just hold it down,
Yeah.
or did they just tap it? So even when I'm blowing a horn trying to get somebody's attention, I try my best,
Yeah.
just to tap it, and not
Yeah.
hold it down
Yeah.
because you don't want it to be picked up the wrong way. But you do need
Mhm.
them to pay attention that the light just changed.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Yep. No, that's good. I've had to me personally lay off the horn altogether. And I can't be the giver of horn, because giver of horn for me is when I'm ready to go. Like if I'm honking, then I'm ready to go. But I'm with you. There's sometimes I can do a light tap, but I was so embarrassed, and this is bad. I was on my way somewhere. I was in a rush, and this is like maybe a couple months ago. I gave somebody the horn, and then finally when I got around it was an old lady, and I was like, man, you know what I mean? Like, bro, like it's an old lady, you know what I mean? Like she just living her best life, and she kind of threw her hands up, like, what's going on? Like, why are you so aggressive with the horn? And I felt terrible because it was so unnecessary. And if I'd have just been patient, I wouldn't have had that response that I had. But it's just one of those things where if you're not on guard, and if you're not continuously paying attention to your own emotional state, driving and taking a long time to make the left, even though we had a left-hand turn and it was a green light and she could have went. She didn't, but it wasn't the end of the world. But I just wasn't in a space in that moment because, like you're saying, I'm still bettering myself in those moments. And I, again, like I said, I just have to leave the horn alone because it usually ends up being something I regret later. And it was just sad. I just felt all the guilt in the world and shame when I finally caught up to her and saw who she was. And I was like, bro, this was inappropriate, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And hopefully I don't see her on Sunday morning. So one of those things. I had to explain. She the young man that was I got a twin. But yeah. And so with that situation, so we getting back to baby, I'm gonna meet you, please. Okay. When I get to the interpretation phase, we get to the next step of the physical response. Again, when I'm giving examples of when I talk to these teachers, the physical response could be they get short of breath, their heart rate jumps, like they can feel their heart pounding, their adrenaline kicks in. That's when the fight, flight, or freeze portion happens. The limbic system kicks into high gear, and then people generally stop thinking rationally when they get to that point when they're just all worked up. It's called, one of the terms we use is called flooding. Are y'all familiar with flooding? You ever heard of flooding before?
I've never heard of it, but I can understand what it's saying. I can see why someone would use that term dealing with how you interpret emotions that are coming and your that's causing it. I get the word.
Yeah. So it's kind of like how I've heard it explained is like those are familiar with like carburetors, right? When you give something too much gas over time, it gets flooded, and now you can't turn the engine over anymore. That's the carburetor, right? That does that. Yeah. So it's the same thing. When we get so overwhelmed with something that happens, we get flooded with emotions, and we either can't respond or we don't respond in a way that's proper. And so as we go through the scenario again, we'll add in some steps. But basically, that's the issue. Kid talks out of term, you interpret as disrespectful or whatever the case may be. Then you have this physical response, this physiological response where you're like, and then you get flooded with emotions, and then the urge to act kicks in. And so what happens is the responses I've gotten when I've done this with teachers again, the urge to act, it might be, hey, they'll just ignore it and act like it'll go away on its own. And so it's like, what do I do? Or they know they should do something immediately, but they can't think rationally enough to figure out what that action is. So you have this urge, like this thing happens, and you have this urge, like I need to do something. But when you're not in your right space, when you're not in your right mind, when you're not thinking clearly, you can't always act in the way that you should. You know something should happen, but you don't act in the way you should, right? And so when we get to part 5, the 5th step, these are the actions. So you can tell the student to stop talking. This may be the 4th, 5th, 7th, 5th, 11th time. You can get angry. Person gets angry. Then they raise their voice. They kick the kid out of class. Or maybe they'll use some kind of shaming technique where they say, you should be listening. And this is why you failed the last test or whatever the case is, because you're not listening. And so those actions, those are all a bunch of different actions that people could take. And I think telling a student to stop talking, maybe not the worst thing to do, but it kind of just gets worse. Like you get angry, you raise your voice, you kick the student out of the class, you publicly shame them. Like these are all actions that don't necessarily need to be taking place, but because you're not thinking clearly, you don't have a good response to it, this is kind of what happens. And then y'all tell me, what do you think the teachers say that they feel like after when they've either yelled at the student or publicly shamed them or kicked them out of class? What do you feel like the after effects might be in that situation?
Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes it might be remorse, because in my mind, it seems like that action might cause a prompting event for the other party, and then so now they're going through their cycle. So yeah, I think they might feel remorse, or they might feel some kind of satisfaction.
Yeah, those are the two main things, right? And so I think the remorse is appropriate response. Satisfaction may be appropriate, but I feel like if you're challenging class students publicly, you're shaming them, like raising your voice, yelling, that may not be the optimal, but some people, because the way some people are, like, yes, they feel like that was the appropriate thing to do. I think as adults and rational adults, we probably know that it's not the right thing to do, but some people will feel justified in their actions because the student needed it or they need to learn a lesson or whatever the case may be. But I think it's like you're saying, hey, there's remorse is what we should feel in those situations for the most part. And I think, again, some of the responses I've tallied over time is that teachers feel bad because they didn't treat that student well. They feel bad because, again, like you said, it's an activating event for that student. So now they're in a cycle of emotions and now they're responding. And if you all watch any type of social media or the news or whatever, you see a lot more students being really, 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 really willing to fight their teachers at a drop of a hat. Males, females, older, younger. Like it's an epidemic of great proportions right now. And I don't know who's raising these kids. Well, I guess I do know who's raising these kids, but it's a bad state that we're in, where these kids so frequently, it seems like it happens so often, they're attacking their teachers. Not saying that, it's the teacher's fault, but what I am saying is in those situations, like you mentioned, when you respond wrong, it could be a real threat to your safety, depending on that student and what cycle of emotion they're in and how they process their emotions. And then again, some people feel like if they were a good teacher, this wouldn't be happening. And they feel like they're not accomplishing their goals and they're not doing well as a teacher. So what I wanted to do now is ask any questions now, or anybody got any thoughts, anything they want to share?
I mean, I agree that you want to be appropriate, but at the same time, I think some cycles are meant to be broken, and so I think that there has to be some type of corrective behavior. I don't think you fix this problem by manufacturing your interpretation to where it's always peaches and cream. I think that there has to be a correction of behavior, because one thing about a cycle, if you keep spinning, you get dizzy, and so I think that if you don't figure out a way to curb the prompting event, and you're just satisfied going through the cycle, and you don't deal with the prompting event, that can cause you to be dizzy and make some very irrational and unbalanced decisions also. So I agree that these things occur, but I don't think you just always choose the side that's less offensive, because there has to be correction.
Yeah. 100%. And you're right. There's a time and a place for all these different things, and corrective behavior is always corrective responses are always appropriate. And it's like you said, it's just the way in which you handle it, because you're saying you can't, if you're in a classroom and somebody's always being disrespectful or over talking or loud talking or whatever, then you can't teach a class and people can't learn in an environment like that. And so I do agree that you have to manage that well. And so this is what we'll do now. We'll switch gears. We'll use that same scenario, but I'll put in some points. I wish I had I forgot the other slide, but we're gonna add some things to this cycle of emotion that kind of allow us to have a different 5 and 6, depending on what we're going. And I didn't send it to you. It's not something.
Do you have the other slide with you?
I don't. I was gonna make it,
okay,
but I'll just.
I was just gonna give you privilege.
Yeah, I'll just. Yeah, no, it's good. I don't have it. You know what? But I can. I think this is 2023. I think I can use. I can write on this.
Yeah, it's actually 2024.
Yeah, it is. Okay, is it whiteboards? No, it's not whiteboards.
Yeah,
I don't think I have it. I don't think.
Okay, let me switch you over, then there may be something that you can do on your end.
Okay, all right. Let me see. AI companion reactions apps whiteboard. Okay. Oh yeah, it's a whole lot of stuff going on over here. Okay. Where is it at? Where is it at? I got to figure out annotate. No, that's not it. All right, if I can figure this out while I'm talking, I'll do it.
Okay.
Focus mode. Whiteboards. Is it whiteboards? No, I don't want to mess it up.
I got you.
I think I would create a whiteboard. But basically, so we take the same event. We have a teacher that's in the classroom. A student is talking again. So initially we said the interpretation was the student is disrespectful. They don't care about the class. I'm a bad teacher. The student isn't fully engaged. So in between number 2 and number 3, we insert a pause. So before we let ourselves get all worked up, before we let ourselves anxiety kick in, before we start raising our voice, before we start doing anything, like you said before, we change the interpretation, but we don't excuse the behavior, right? You don't want your interpretation to be like, oh, it's okay, oh, blah, 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 blah. There's different ways. So if you look at it, it's like, all right, and this is real time. Like this is the stuff that the one thing I try to teach people, you gotta stay ready, so you have to get ready, like we talked about. And so when you're in real time dealing with an event that triggers something in you, you have to be able to think on the fly. And the way you think on the fly is having practiced this stuff ahead of time or rehearsing it, you know what I mean, over and over again. Not necessarily saying like you spend an hour a day, like if a student says this, I do this. You just have to be in the habit of knowing like, hey, the first set of interpretation that comes to my mind aren't always the right ones. So if I'm at that red light and somebody honks at me, if my first interpretation is, hey, somebody wants to fight, I can say, hey man, let's stop that. Let's get a real assessment of the situation. Has the light turned green? Is there an ambulance behind me? Is somebody trying to alert me that an older person trying to cross the street, they're coming slow? Is somebody trying to alert me that a biker zooming through? Like there's all kind of interpretations that can happen. But if my first response is always aggression and I want to fight, then that's where my problem lies. So if we're getting back to this teacher situation, there's other interpretations besides the student is disrespectful, they don't care about the class. And so you have a situation where you can understand maybe they're helping their neighbor. Maybe the person next to them had a question. They couldn't get my attention, and maybe they're helping them. Whether or not they should be, that's not the point. Like this, we're just thinking through different interpretations. Maybe they're talking because, hey, they're 8th grader and they're very social and they haven't learned social rules. Again, this is like maybe first month of class, maybe not at the end of the school year. They should have that down by then. But maybe they're having a hard time knowing when it is appropriate time to talk. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe their school isn't a priority because they got things going on at home that's distracting them. And maybe their outburst of their talking is in relation to whatever else they got going on. And maybe they're upset about something else that's going on and they're kind of venting. And so again, as you said, Pastor Rawls, I'm not trying to make interpretations that excuse the behavior, but what my goal in this is to have interpretations on deck so that I respond properly, so that my 3, 4, 5, and 6 are in good space. So even if I have to have a rationale of like, hey, maybe they got something going on at home and maybe I need to talk to them or take them aside or have them come to my desk and speak quietly and figure out what's going on. And if they're just like, hey, they're just acting a fool because they're acting a fool, then the appropriate response may be to send you out of class. The appropriate response may be to give you a referral. There may be some other I can't right now, baby. I can't right now. I'll be there. There may be some kind of situation where you may need to send them to somebody else, like a principal, vice principal, to reprimand that student. But again, it's all about your interpretation. If your interpretation allows you to not respond in a way that's inappropriate, then you're on the right track. Does that make sense? Am I working in those two worlds of like not letting them off the hook, but also doing what I need to do for me to respond the right way?
Yeah, I think there really has to be a strong focus on self-preservation because I've done a lot of social justice work in the past, and I don't really experience as much in Gainesville, but in St. Johns County, there was just blatant confrontations that I had to have with white supremacists, and so I might have an interpretation of something that's done, and my interpretation could be right, but then I have to decide, okay, now what's going to be in my best interest, and so I got to make sure my response is going to work well for me also. And so if my response has me in jail unnecessarily, did I win? And so that's where I have to. That's where I have to. My interpretation might be right, but I got to make sure that my physical response isn't something that doesn't work well for jail. Might be fine for me because I might be trying to prove a bigger point. But I got to make sure that I do what's in my best interest. And what made me think about that was I volunteered at one of the local high schools and just kind of provide an extra set of eyes during lunch. And there were some girls that were friends, and two girls that were actually really good friends. But one of them just made a bad choice and a joke, and she snatched the girl's wig off, and it was supposed to be funny, but the person that interpreted it wasn't funny. You just snatched my wig off, and now everybody laughing at me, and so her physical response was these two good friends. I mean, these were friends. These weren't enemies. These were two good friends, but they ended up in a all out brawl. Tore the cafeteria up, and so what has to happen when I'm interpreting what just happened? I'm mad, but I got to make sure this is in my best interest. And so in the end, by the time we go back to the dean's office, now two good friends got to go home for 4 days. And it feel better if I got suspended for fighting the enemy, but I'm fighting a friend, and for 4 days. And so I think you really gotta look at self-preservation also. Make sure that your response is something that you're willing to accept. Your response is going to come with the results that you're willing to accept and that you desired out of the situation.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and I think part of that too is like, imagine if the girl that got her wig snatched off was able to have a pause there and like, you know what, who did this? Why did they do it? But I think because of all that's going on, so people are laughing at you. You're already embarrassed. Like you're saying, it don't matter friend or foe. In that type of situation, like sometimes the response is, I got to put these hands on you. I'm not saying it should be, but like there may have been a pause, and maybe she thought about it. She's like, this is the time where I have to teach my friend a lesson. But like you're saying, when you self-serving and you're thinking about what's best for your own self-interest, it might have been like, all right, I'll catch you later. You know what I'm saying? Like, get my wig, walk off, do whatever, and then handle it in a different way. But that's maybe the next part of the conversation is like when you're the person that's being wronged in that type of situation, and there's a cycle that's happening. It's kind of like you saying before, when a teacher talks out of turn to a student, or tries to embarrass a student, that's going to kick off a cycle of emotion. I think the same example, like the girl got her wig snatched off, and there was a cycle of emotion that happened. There was an event, she interpreted, that's how she interpreted, and the number 5, the action was, we fight. We finna tear this. We move some tables in this lunchroom, and so this is kind of important too, because I think that even when something's that heinous, that egregious, we can still have that pause, because you can still. So what I kind of misspoke before. So when you have the interpretation and you take that pause because you're trying to think through like all the scenarios of what's going on, physical responses again is like we mentioned before. You can have the butterflies in your stomach. Your palms can get sweaty. You can feel like your nerves is going bad. You can be anxious. You can have the fight or flight response. And so I think that's what the girl had. She had a fight response. So you had the interpretation happen, and her response was to have a fight. It wasn't flight, it wasn't freeze, it was fight, right? And so with that being the case, once you have those, it's called an activating event. When usually our body, if we're paying attention to it, we'll recognize that we feel a certain way about an event that has happened. So when the girl got her wig snatched off, you can say that there might have been nervousness in her stomach, like I don't really want to fight you, but I want to fight you. Those of us that have been in fights before, you know, I've seen hood dudes cry before it was time to fight. And I don't know why. Like that was their consistent before they got into a fight. Their interaction happened, the tears start flowing. He's like, oh no, Johnny about to swing on him, and boom, he swings on him, right? Or I've seen other dudes, they put their hands behind their back and they look down and they slowly walk over to the person, pow, they swing on them, right? So there's whatever the thing that your body's doing, like putting the hands behind the back, may be a physical response that people have automatically so that they don't fight, but then they just resist that urge. The tears are the response, like, hey man, I really am about to fight you right now, so stop talking about me. But it also could be internal in terms of the butterflies in your stomach, the sweaty palms, those things. So nothing necessarily has to change because that's an involuntary response that our body has. Like you get butterflies in your stomach when you get nervous before you publicly speak. That's what your body does. There's really nothing you can do about those butterflies, but you can respond. And so that's when we have another pause that I would put right there in between 3 and 4. So you have the event, you interpret it how you interpret it. You try to make it as best as possible with the interpretation. There's a physical response or a physiological response, however you want to take it, the butterflies, the nervous, the anxiety. And so before you have your urge to act or you make your mind about what you should do, you got to put a pause in there so that and what that is taking a few deep breaths. If it's a teacher, maybe the teacher needs to have a seat, gather themselves. Maybe they step outside the room, whatever that looks like. With the girl when she got her wig snatched off, maybe it's take some deep breath, maybe it's count to 10, maybe it's going to the restroom, maybe it's move yourself from that area where everybody's laughing at you. But you got to do something after you notice your body tells you, hey, I feel a certain way. Once you get the butterflies, once you get the sweaty palms, once you get the nervous feeling in your stomach, whatever that looks like, once you put them hands behind your back before your body says swing, you have to know, like, yo, I have to really, 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 really remove myself from this situation as best as possible, so that I can do what I need to do to calm down and to make a rational decision. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah, I think I'm not in it like we got a lot of gun violence with the young men in our community, and I think I think they experience this cycle. I'm not I'm not in it, so I'm not sure how it was, but how it is now. But I just remember when I was in college, and even though we were in college to get an education, all of us were pretty smart fellows. So all of us were admitted in the University of Florida, which wasn't hard. I mean, easy to do. And but for some strange reason, we thought that we were thugs. and and I can remember that we got into something with a rival fraternity. I don't know why we were rivals. We were all black men, but we got into something at a party. And I think that was the prompting event. And then now the interpretation of what happened, and this is group interpretation, not single interpretation, but now the interpretation of what happened. You got this stuff going on, and it's causing like a lot of physical response. And in this case right here, it was the opposite fraternity of what I was in. That we're going back and we doing after party now, chilling. And but I'm sure there was physical response on the other side that kind of worked people up and kind of urged them to act. And then the next thing we know, all college guys, the other fraternity now is outside of our after party shooting inside the party, and that wasn't even our character. I mean, none of our characters, them or us, but it took us out of character to a place to where we didn't even put much thought. The action was something that I don't think any of us would do, and so I wasn't, I was actually, out of school by the time, but I knew everything that went on. But everybody that I talked to on, because I had friends that were in that fraternity and I was in my fraternity, and as we talked to those young guys, I mean, those young guys were just scared to death because they couldn't believe what they had what they had worked themselves up to do. And so now you got criminal charges, on people that are, majoring in engineering and all kind of stuff like that. You got criminal charges, but they just allowed that cycle just to keep going in a negative direction, and ended up in a place to where they never thought that they would end up in, because they were just not sober minded, and some of them got kicked out of school, and all over, a fight at a party, and now you've been kicked out of college, and in some cases, arrested for firing a gun, and so I think if we don't teach our young people how to interpret this stuff and deal with this stuff and make it real to them, they just keep going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, and 6 is, that's when they're at Greater Bethel, seeing if they could, use the church for a funeral, and so we really got to put this kind of stuff in the minds of our young people to let them know that, you got to know how to cut this thing short, before you get round to a 6 that you never thought that you would be facing.
Right. Yep. 100%. Yep, I agree. And it's an epidemic. It's happening everywhere. I think I mentioned it before in one of the previous mental health talks, is that, you watch a show like First 48, and I mentioned it before, you have all these young black men who in the heat of the moment do something, pull a gun out, do something, do some other situation, and now they're facing the rest of their lives in jail because they didn't take a moment to really assess the situation properly. And in the heat of the moment, you've done something that you can't undo, that you probably wouldn't do if you had thought rationally about the situation, especially when it's not something premeditated. Premeditated is a whole other situation. But when you just in that moment respond, and it's happening everywhere. And I don't know how we've got to a point in the community where our response is always just violence, and not always, but our response, especially with our young boys and young men, is just violence immediately. It just makes no sense, and it doesn't end well. But you're right, we have to figure out how to make this thing become more important to parents and caregivers. We have to teach our kids how to properly respond, if nothing else, to preserve their life. You know what I mean? If nothing else, hey, being able to walk away. I think in a situation where a girl get her wig snatched off, it's very embarrassing, and it shouldn't have happened. But you're right, it hits that girl, and that girl falls and hits her head on the concrete and dies or goes into a coma. She's facing charges. You know what I mean? Right? And I understand being embarrassed, and I understand that was a terrible situation to be in. But if you do something in that moment, and I've seen it happen over and over, you hit somebody and they hit their head on the ground, it's a wrap. You're going to jail forever. Or not forever, but you're going to jail for a long time. And you've now just killed your friend because your friend made a bad choice in snatching your wig off, And so we have to have ways in which that we are able to think fully before we respond. So thank you for that, too. So when we think about the pause that we put in between 3 and 4, again, in a scenario where we're looking back at the teacher. So before, when we went through the scenario, when we got to the urge to act, because they based their interpretation in something that was negative, when they got to the urge to act, it made them feel like they needed to do something, but they didn't really think through what they needed to do, and it led to negative 4, 5, and 6. So in this situation, if you interpreted things in a way that you can process things properly, if you've taken a pause in between your stomach dropping, you get nervous, you get anxiety, and thinking like, okay, I need to take a deep breath. I need to think about what I'm doing. I need to remove myself from the stimuli. I need to get out of here. I need to do something besides respond. Then your urge to act is like, okay, I need to address this issue like the teacher. I need to address the student talking. But before I actually take an action, I'm going to relax and try to get more information about what's actually happening. And you may find out that, hey, you know what? This kid is talking this particular time because a bunch of them are worked out about a test they're about to take in the next class. Or again, you may find out there's something else going on at home. Or you may find out, you just get more information. So instead of just assuming based on your bad interpretation how you should respond, if you get more information and find out what's really going on before you actually take an action, you can, get to the 5th point in a way that makes sense. 4 and 5 are kind of murky. They kind of work together. But the point is there's an urge, which is I need to do something. And then the actual doing something are 2 different stages. But things can happen so fast that all this stuff just kind of happens quick. again, with the weekend snatch off, boom, I'm hitting you and we fighting immediately, right? There's no pausing and thinking. And so when you're taking action, again, in this situation with a teacher, you've taken your prompts, you've calmed down, you found out what's really going on. So now instead of your action being, I'm yelling at the student, I'm fussing at the student, I'm kicking them out of class, I'm doing whatever. Now I can say, hey, you know what? Maybe in a calm manner, hey guys, I know everybody's worked up about that test next period, but we got to get through the material that we're doing today. And we can't, just be blurting out. People are trying to learn. Hey, I understand that, you might be able to just have a way to address the situation. Like, hey, maybe right now isn't the right time to kind of talk about that because I do care about your test, but right now we got to do what we got to do within this classroom. And you can just say, hey, if you need extra time or we need to work on something, we can talk about that, but we got to focus on today's mission in this class. Does that make sense how that's different from fussing and kicking the kid out or doing whatever to now being able to think about a perfect response or a good response and being able to address it in a way that doesn't cause that student to go into a cycle of emotion or you having to say or do something you regret. Makes sense. Okay. Makes sense, bro? Follow?
Yeah.
Okay. Not yet. Hold on, I'm almost done. All right. And so now we talk about after effects. This is the point where it's like, okay, how do we feel in the after moments? Like you're saying with the students that are now shooting at the University of Florida, I'm sure they feel really terrible now that they're dealing with the after effects. Like, hey, they've had time to think, they've had time to process. Like, why did we even get to this point? Some people might have had to think about that while they were in jail. Some people might have to think about that when they were sitting at home and not at the school anymore. But in the immediacy of the after effects, when you take these steps to pause and think about what you're doing, to get more information, to have the proper interpretation, you can feel good about the way you handled it. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing. How do I feel good? What do I need to do to make sure I feel good in the do I feel like, hey, man, I really supported my students, but I also stood up for myself. I was able to say, hey, I hear how y'all feel. I recognize you're kind of worked up about that next test, but we can't do that right now. So now you've been able to handle that situation, reassure the kids that you're concerned about their well-being, but you've also maintained your dignity and didn't have to act out of character and fuss and yell and cuss and do all these different things at the students. And then from here on out, like you can have a better way to measure how you respond to students when they're talking out of turn. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and so that's pretty much kind of like how this cycle works. Again, the point of the cycle is making sure that we interpret properly. We can't avoid the physiological response. Like that's just our body's just telling us that we feel a certain way. It's almost like when we are dehydrated and we get a headache. That physical response is our body saying, hey, we need more water. We need more water. We need more water. So it's the same thing. Somebody's said something, done something that you feel a certain way about it. Your body responds. You can't really do nothing about that. But again, you can take a pause before you think about how you're going to act. You can take a pause before you act. And that end result is having good after. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts, any concerns about this whole cycle?
Yeah, no, I just think it's pretty good, and I think it's something that and not just the children, but people just should be exposed to, but definitely our young people, and even in organizations like churches and things like that. I see all the time. Hey, this happened, and people automatically assume that somebody meant the worst for it, and the interpretation might be off. They might not have been trying to be mean. That just it might not have been that way. So how about going and asking? Is this what you meant? You might find out it is. You might find out it's not. But at least you're real clear and accurate on your interpretation. So I think a conversation could be had to just be sure that what you're in, and everybody you might not be that close to go and have a conversation. But if it's somebody that you're supposed to be connected with, you all in the same organization or whatever, ask the question: Is this what you meant? Because this is how I see it. Is that
Yeah.
And that could that could be that pause to kind of help that next response, that physical response. The fact that okay, I done got all worked up and it really wasn't even meant to be that way. I know it helps out in a marriage.
100%, and that is definitely a conversation for another day. But it's really communication and understanding how to communicate and understanding how to get your emotions under control. And I don't know, it's weird because we talked about it other times. It seems like there can be times where something needs to get nipped in the bud, addressed immediately. Somebody, when they say you were publicly disrespectful, so you need to publicly apologize. There's all kind of things that we talk about when it comes to stop. When it comes to relationships with people, when it comes to talking to people, when it comes to understanding. But I think what happens when we go left a lot of times is that we don't seek to get that understanding, right? We just respond because we've always responded this way to disrespect. How I was raised, there is you meet disrespect with that same amount of energy immediately, and it does you no good. I have plenty of friends who didn't make it past the age of 18 because their idea of responding or handling an event was responding to that aggression or whatever that situation was immediately in the same manner, and sometimes even past that point of what the offense was, and it doesn't end well, And so I think that, like you said, in any situations, whether it's a conversation, whether it's we're in the same organization, whatever the case may be, if we don't manage our interpretation, if we don't manage how we feel about what was said, well, even if they meant the disrespect, like I've had recently, I've had to understand that, hey, I can control situations by the way in which I respond. So if and again, my issue is aggression. So I'm not saying this so y'all can start testing me. I don't need no help. But what I've noticed when somebody comes with aggression, I feel like the spirit is speaking to me. Hey, you can always say, hey, sir, ma'am, there's a lot of aggression. I don't understand what's going on. Maybe something's been misinterpreted, but is there a way that we can proceed and have this conversation in a way that we both can feel respected, right? And so instead of me meeting that aggression or meeting that feeding my desire in my flesh to respond in a way that they know I feel disrespected, I can always command the room by bringing it down a level, bringing it down a notch, responding to that person in a way that it's called disarming. So when we talk about in counseling, when we want to say we have or setting the table or disarming. So this is quickly. So we talked about marriage, right? So if we're in a situation where we are having a conversation with our spouse, right? And we want to have a conversation to where they can hear what we're saying. We can set the table. We can put some candles out, some rose petals on the floor, make the favorite dinner. This is all metaphorically speaking. You can put the nice silverware out. So when they sit down to the table, they're like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Now, the dish that's served may be some cold duck, but because the ambiance is right, they might be all right with the cold duck. And they may be willing to sit there and maybe nibble on the cold duck or let you have your cold duck, but they're willing to sit at the table because the table's been set right, right? And so the conversation can be had, things can flow well. But if you're like, hey, I'm gonna just let you have it and I'm gonna just respond how I feel like responding right now in immediacy, you can forget about that. That communication is done. It's just gonna escalate. And so again, with the idea of disarming, it's the same way. When there's somebody's armed and they looking to be dangerous, you can't come in and be like, hey, put the gun down. No, you gotta talk nice. You got to remind them of their civic responsibility to act humanely and don't just start shooting up. So, there's ways in which you disarm. And so whether you're setting the table or whether you're disarming someone nicely, we as the person have the opportunity and the power to disarm or to set the table. But oftentimes we don't do that properly because we're too busy in this cycle to where somebody does something, this is my action. Somebody does something, this is my action. And the whole point of this is really being able to get to a place where you can disarm, where you can calm yourself down, where you can set the table and be able to have you can act in a way that's good or beneficial, and or you can kind of, stop the cycle that you've been doing for all your life and respond in a way that makes sense or that's good or that's right.
All right, good stuff. Well, John, we appreciate you, man. And just for everybody, I was having a conversation with one of the teenagers in our ministry, and just wanting to know because the reality is we train our children in the way to go, but they don't necessarily always, just because they go to church every Sunday with you, they don't necessarily have their own faith. And but they come because we're training them. We're putting it inside of them so that one day it'll blossom. and we're just having a conversation with one of our teenagers, and we're just sharing. Do you think it would be beneficial? In the same way that we release the children to go to children's church and learn good, positive, moral, spiritual lessons. Do you think it would be something nice to for the teenagers to go and do something like that, to where they can talk about real? Because you mentioned, just about real issues that they deal with, and and do you think it'll be something positive, like that would be something positive for teenagers during that 30 minutes to go and have good conversation and an opportunity to accept Christ if there's something that was said that you say, you know what, I think I have faith. I believe. And as soon as, he said that he thought that would be great, immediately I called John and was like, hey, John, third Sunday. Want to launch this right here. John's our youth minister, and John agreed that he'll be ready and prepared to do it. And so this Sunday we're launching that. Once we pulled our young ones out, we're going to pull our teens out and send them to a different room and have a real life conversation with scriptures to support how we handle situations, and how the scripture says that we should interpret or look at situations. And so get your teenager to church this Sunday as we launch our teen church. All right. I think that's most of what we have. And so we just want to thank everybody for joining us. Any final words, John?
No, I think that life is much better when we handle ourselves in a way that allows us to feel good when things are all said and done. It may not always get resolved in that moment, but if we're able to take a step back, think about what we're doing before we do them, usually we'll have good results. And again, that's not to say that the other person respond the right way or other people to do the right thing, but when we take the time to do the right thing and respond the right way, generally we get good results and we can feel good about what transpired.
All right, Dr. Cole or Judge Rose, one of you all have anything you want to say before we head out?
Very interesting tonight. I enjoy listening.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I don't know what happened to my Zoom. I couldn't come on Zoom, so I had to come on the phone.
Oh, I got you. Well, I got you. Well, we still hear you real clear.
Okay, good.
All right. All right. So I want to thank everybody for joining you, and have a wonderful week. Hope to see you tomorrow at our noon prayer on the same Zoom channel, and we have a Real Talk Bible study at 6 o'clock tomorrow. So hope to see you then. Have a great one.
All right. Good night.